Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It is so good to have you here this Tuesday morning. And as we focus on health, on wellness, we're going to get into a really good conversation. Now, in today's fast-paced work environment, burnout has become an all too common experience, unfortunately, and affecting 36% of South African workers with excessive daily stress. Now, with the financial cost of burnout to the South African economy soaring to 161 billion rand annually, it's clear that this issue demands attention. And that is why we're joined by Professor Renata Skuman. She's a psychiatrist and head of healthcare leadership at Stellenbosch Business School, to unpack the signs, the impact, and also, most importantly, the solutions for burnout. Prof, welcome. Thank you for being here on this cold morning.
Good morning. I am so happy that you're joining us and that we are able to talk about burnout, because I always look at burnout and you think about it as, well, I think about it as like this massive tsunami wave that's coming, but by the time you see it, it's almost too late. You know, because there's so much happening behind the scenes in terms of burnout. And like Carissa said, the Gallup report indicates 36% of South African workers experiences excessive daily stress, which ultimately can lead, if untreated, to burnout. So I want to kick it off the bat here. Early signs and symptoms. I want to help people out there because we know life is hectic. What are we looking at?
So I think it's very important first that we see that burnout is not a medical disorder. It's an occupational phenomenon. So it can only happen if you are employed. So maybe that's a good thing already.
That's a good thing.
It's a good start to have
employment.
But the first symptoms that we see is if there is repetitive, chronic stress, people obviously get mental fatigue, emotional fatigue, physical fatigue, and then negative patterns start to develop, sleeping problems, eating problems, that drink after work to feel better, but also then behavioral changes. You withdraw from your colleagues at work, you don't want to interact with them, you get irritable, you can start to be working harder and harder, but not smarter. So your productivity levels, in fact, go down. So that is some of the first symptoms that we see in the workplace that should be identified. The sad part of it, by the time people approach professionals, it's usually not burnout anymore, but a full-blown mental health disorder, whether it's an adjustment disorder or a major depressive episode or anxiety disorder. So people do not manage the early stages of burnout, and then we see the complications and the fallout.
Can I just quickly ask, how bad does it get if left untreated? What is, I would not say, almost the pinnacle of burnout where you physically shut down? How bad does it get?
So by the time it's a medical disorder, so as I said, burnout is that first stages where you have that fatigue, the depersonalization and the decrease in productivity. But then what often happens, and that's the problem, people go to a GP and they booked off for a month or 3 months to rest. But there's no treatment, there's no intervention in that time. And then nothing happens, nothing gets better. They go back to the workplace or they don't return. And one of the problems that we see, for every month you booked off from work, your chance to return to work is significantly decreased. So people often then go into the spiral of temporary disability and eventually being medically boarded, where if in the early stages you got professional help, we could have treated you and prevented you and helped to make solutions in the workplace or for you as a person to be able to successfully return to work. If left untreated, as I mentioned, depression, for example, and the worst outcome of depression is suicide.
My goodness.
Oh my goodness, Prof. You are giving us so much information. So you said it's an occupational disorder, right? And I wonder, with employees maybe watching right now, getting ready for work, what impact does it have on both the workspace, but also the health of the individual? I know you've gone through a couple of them, but maybe you can highlight some that really stand out for you that we need to actually be aware of.
So we touched on the mental outcome for the employee as such, but there's also then the impact on the colleagues. You know, if someone is off work, if you don't replace that person, the load on the other colleagues increase and put them at risk. But there's also physical health consequences, so increase in cardiovascular disease, migraines and chronic pain, obesity, increase in diabetes. So there's a lot of things linked to that as well. And then also, what is very important for the employers is the loss of productivity, an increase in absenteeism, increase in presenteeism, increased staff turnover. If you lose people, you also have institutional knowledge that's down the drain, and you have to recruit again and retrain, and it can also create brand damage if you are later on being seen as a toxic workspace for people to work in.
You mentioned a little bit earlier, you know, when you're in this whole burnout kind of phase of your life and your work, you know, you don't necessarily stop working, but you don't work smarter anymore. You just kind of show up at work. And we've also seen that burnout is particularly prevalent among those who's overcommitted to their job and dedicated to their job. Why is this the case? Is it just that factor of what goes on in that scenario?
So there's a few factors again that contribute. I think the bigger socioeconomic environment as well. You're scared of losing your job. If you don't perform, what happens? And then we see the star achievers or the high performers, and we almost see performance punishment, where they're always prepared to raise their hand. The saying, you give the busy people to get the job done.
Yeah.
You know, and people then tap it. The employers use that because I say, if I give it to her, she will always get it done, you know, and it's a vicious circle then that's happening. And those employees also, they will take it on. They want to do their best, and then they work longer, and they do not have the boundaries between work and personal life. I don't like the terminology balance, work-life balance. Work is an essential part of your life. It's part of who we are. It gives meaning to our lives. But it's about boundaries. When you switch off, to switch off and, you know, protect your environment for your family and protect your self-care, to exercise or to sleep or whatever. And then also when you're at work, not to try to multitask. One of the studies that recently come out that showed that South Africa have the highest amount of screen time per day of any country in the world, 56.8% of our waking hours. But only 5 of that 9.5 hours is being productive. The rest we waste on TV or social media.
Yes, scrolling.
Yes, and then you waste time. So now you don't do the good things because you don't have time, and you don't actually then refill your tank. So as I said, rest is not the answer to burnout. You actually need to have active rest where you intervene to recharge your batteries.
Wow, Prof. Skuman, thank you
So
very
much
much.
information.
I really
love
do
it.
hope that some of what Prof. Skuman said this morning is hitting home for you. Maybe it's helped you, you know, a light goes on in your scenario, maybe at work, and made you recognize a couple of signs and symptoms. But we are going to be back with the Prof a little bit later on. We also want to unpack the differences between normal work stress and burnout, and also what can be done from an organization side to support their employees. I'm looking forward to that chat.
I definitely am, and I'm taking notes as I'm sitting here. So thanks, Prof. We'll see you in a little bit. All right, now it is time for Pharmacy of the Week, where we salute the remarkable individuals leading the charge in healthcare. And today we pay tribute to the fearless champions at Coetzee Pharmacy out in George. Proudly brought to you by Adcock Ingram, OTC sponsors of Brave.
Only you can make my day. It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. You're tuning into your Feel Good Breakfast Show, Expresso, right here on S3. It's all about health and wellness and taking care of you. And right now, we are continuing our conversation on burnout and delving deeper into the workplace factors that contribute to this issue. And back with us again, Professor Renate Skuman, a psychiatrist and head of healthcare leadership at Stellenbosch Business School. She's here, and she's here to share insights on how organizations can foster a culture of mental wellness and the pivotal role of management plays in all of this. Prof, thank you very much. Welcome back once again. We left it off. I just want to quickly unpack the difference. If you stand on the outside and you look into your workplace, your environment, between work stress and burnout, what's the key differences there? Because stress is stress. We experience it on a daily.
Yeah, if you don't stress, you'll be dead.
Yeah.
So it's maybe
There we go.
a good sign as well. So stress is normal.
Yeah.
And if we talk between good stress or use stress, which helps you to perform and to cope and help you to reach a deadline, and distress, when you start to develop physical or mental symptoms. Now, burnout develops when there is chronic, consistent, excessive stress that is not then balanced with recharging yourself and protecting yourself. And for then, the stress is the causative factor, and your response to it is then the symptoms of burnout, that mental and emotional fatigue and the physical fatigue,
Right.
the depersonalization, and then reduce accomplishment and work performance.
Yeah. Look, it is a complicated issue, and we spoke a little bit off air. You spoke about active rest when there's treatment that needs to happen when you're in a scenario of burnout. You mentioned this analogy of a phone, and I love that. I want you to share that. Yeah.
So if you're tired, you can go and sleep and you feel refreshed when you wake up. If you have burnout, it's like a cell phone. You can't just put your cell phone when the battery is flat on the table and expect it to be better. You actually need to plug it in and to charge it. And that is the active restoration that we need. And that might be professional then assistance, either medication or therapy, or occupational therapy, where you find a balance between what can be done in the workplace and yourself, what can you do different. And then finally your self-care, which is so important, what people so often neglect, especially if they feel pressed for time. The exercise, the sleeping, the diet, the socializing, managing screen time, spirituality, all of those good things that actively charge your battery.
You can't think about having a crazy hectic week and then think the weekend is here, now I can just sleep.
No.
It's not going to make that difference. It's not going to recharge you. You need to find that way. We want to focus on the workplace, and what are some of the common workplace factors that contribute, I think, to an employee's potential burnout?
So one of the biggest reasons for burnout is an imbalance between job demands and resources. And people often just think it's the amount of work I have. A lot of work is good. It's fine. It's when there's a time issue, when there's not enough time to complete it, when there's not enough money to get the resources, the equipment or whatever you need, and then also intellectual resources that's not there. You don't have a mentor, or what we often see is star performers are being promoted, but then they're in a position where they don't have the necessary skills or training or support. So those imbalances is a big cause. And then the other big cause, which is almost the one that gives the most emotional distress, is when there's a mismatch in values. Either your personal values and the organizational values, but what the research shows that is worse is if an organization proclaim values, but the lived values is not aligned with that.
So on that note, what can organizations do from their side? Because we know that it's not always the cause. It's not the organization's fault, you know, or it's not your fault. I think it's how you see it in that space, right? But what can organizations do to foster a better mental health space for their employees?
So over the past couple of years, and I think that is one of the big positive things of the pandemic, was there was really an increased awareness of the mental health of employees. So we saw the rise of mental health programs at work, educational activities, EAP programs, which is not always working because people don't want to access it, but there's definitely more conversations. Unfortunately, the stigma is still rife, but I do think media and people that do struggle with mental health disorders have a bigger role to play in destigmatizing illness. But it is important, very practical, that you see that you protect your star performers as well as supporting the people that take strain. Make sure that you rotate work assignments, make sure that you don't load everything on one person, be fair in how you distribute work. Be sure that you identify issues early, have a safe space where people can voice their concerns and make it possible for people to access care. So flexi time maybe, or additional afternoon off, instead of people then in the end being admitted when there's complications of burnout. What is also very important is to help people understand the importance of work-life boundaries and to make it part of a communication culture, that we know what is the turnaround time expected, what is allowed in terms of social media contact, etc.
Yeah. Look, I think, you know, when it comes to that, I think at the beginning stage, an employee also just wants to feel valued, you know, and I think that's a first step in terms of, you know, fostering that mental health, you know, that drive for an employee to say, like, you know what, I'm glad, I feel valued, I'm here, and this is what I can contribute now because I almost have that energy now to do it. I just want to quickly touch on a statistic we mentioned earlier. The financial cost of burnout to the South African economy estimated 161 billion rand per year. How is that possible? Is it just because of people not being able to work because of burnout?
So it's two factors. It's absenteeism and presenteeism. So absenteeism means people that's booked off from work, not anything done about it. And then the majority is actually presenteeism, people being ill at work. And that amount is more in value monetary terms than all the social grants in South Africa. So if we can keep our workforce healthy, maybe we have money for all that grants as well. So they look at absenteeism and presenteeism. Presenteeism decrease the productivity of people. So you lose an amazing amount of productive work hours. You maybe get 3 hours work out of someone instead of the 6 or 8 hours, depending on your organization.
Sure. Prof. Skuman, thank you very much for your insights this morning. I really appreciate it. Thank you for fighting the good fight as well and unpacking it for us. I really do hope that you have something that you can take away this morning in your own life, maybe looking at someone, maybe advice to a friend that you can see suffering at work. But burnout, it is a real issue and it needs to be addressed as such.